Thank you. Sorry to pull a bit of a bait and switch on everyone here. I committed myself rather rashly to a title that, after a long afternoon's reflection, I decided I probably didn't know as much about or that I'd be able to come up with any conclusion that wouldn't have been revolutionary past about 1998 about free software being a business model in itself. Partly because I come from a company that only recently acquired a business model after 12 or 13 years in operation, and I think that it's probably one of the oldest free software business models, and that ISPs were pretty much the probably the second free software business model after sort of selling and supporting it. And in a way, it was I suppose I'd sort of come to the conclusion, well, you know, free software is kind of won in the sense that we've got Microsoft open sourcing their what they might have seen as their crown jewels a few years ago. The only conclusion I came to was really that starting a free software in itself was probably not a business model, in that if you had to start a small enterprise, then churning through the expensive process of making software and simply putting it out there for free, it didn't actually leave very many business models. So I've gone back to my talking about the business that we've sort of hacked together ourselves the last 12 years, which is the internet service provider business. And I focused on pretty much everything that's gone wrong in the process of going from renting a rack to building a data center a couple of years ago. So we're in the business of making distributed systems, and as is anyone else who runs their own website or any kind of online presence. It's just that ours is pretty much ours and other ISPs are sort of the bottom layer between being online and the inky nothingness of being offline. Oh, hang on, sorry, I've got to. Sorry, I should press that button, shouldn't I? Oh, that's better. So yes, when I talk about failures, it's kind of embarrassing. Yes, hosting providers they do fail all the time, and as there are hosting providers out there that sort of build on top of hosting providers, Heroku building on AWS, that kind of thing. It's good to know what the bottom line is and what the kinds of failures you can expect. And I hope by talking through the kinds of things that have gone wrong with us, talking to a group of people that do like to do things themselves, the idea of building a data center or completely engineering your own online presence isn't too unfamiliar or frightening. The first thing I had to mention about failures is that we have to respond to lots of other people's failures as quickly as our own. So when Links has a problem, then we have to make sure that we know that it was the Links problem, so that when lots of customers are calling up asking why their website is down, we know whereabouts on the network it is. Payment gateways, other hosting providers who specialize in domain registration, that kind of thing. We have to put up outage reports for lots of their sorts of lots of their failures as well. And from a karma point of view, it just doesn't pay to be anything other than sanguine about being part of your service being part of a larger whole, and that people are rarely reliant on just one provider. The upside of that is that when you're talking about failures, when your engineers are talking about failures, you have to sort of remove the idea of personal blame or even blame on your company, because quite often it's in the early stages of an investigation, it's just not clear what's gone wrong, whose fault it might be, and I think a lot of companies tend to default to kind of clamming up and saying and talking in the most general terms, lest they be blamed, lest they be sued, and so we just try to get to the facts of failures even before we've worked out whether it's our fault or not. Having said that, a lot of the things that I'm talking about that have gone wrong here are were my fault, or things that I'm quite happy to have taken the rap for our customers. So these are all one of the most sort of frightening sorts of faults you get with running an internet service provider based on a lot of other people's software is just terrible security holes. Like a couple of years ago, there was a remote root hole in most of Exim, which is the internet mailer that ships with many free software Linux distributions, including Debian, which is what we use. And it's not. I don't think the fact that it was free software, open source, was kind of neither here nor there when it comes to quality. I think it's probably had a slightly better record than most. But what made it different, what made free software different, was that we were able to fix it very fast. We were able to get the information that we needed to patch people on really old distributions that Debian hadn't. Weren't taking account of just through policy. So yes, it was something that we had to. Again, it was something that was not our fault, but our responsibility to customers to fix as part of a sort of wider ecosystem of software that we use. And there were I guess the lessons we learned from that were that we were very glad to be using free software and not reliant on a vendor to be able to reason about the problem and contribute to some fixes ourselves. And the fact that actually at the time we were deploying an awful lot of hosts for customers that just had web hosting and mail all together. And the ones that weren't actually using an email on their servers still happened to be vulnerable to this as well. So there was kind of a lesson about not putting too much on one host. On the other hand, when it comes to sort of the commercial side of selling hosting, then people don't tend to be particularly specific about what they want up front. So we sort of built these hosts to be able to give them whatever they might want in future. The other kind of software failure that we had was kind of the opposite end of the spectrum from a sort of software freedom point of view, and this was a router, a very expensive sort of core router failure. Which we never really established whether it was software or hardware, but it simply it took our network down from at no notice at 3 o'clock in the morning, and it was one of these things as the sort of hacker response is you think no, don't just reboot the thing. We're going to investigate this. We're going to get to the bottom of it. And so it took, I think, 3 or 4 hours of fruitless searching, watching this traffic storm going around the middle of our network and trying to work out where it was coming from before we decided that maybe we should just try a reboot and see if that fixed things. And at that point, the problem went away, and we felt very stupid for having a few thousand hosts offline just while we were trying to get to the bottom of what may have been a hardware or software problem. Ultimately, it wasn't a problem we could have fixed simply because we shipped a crash log off to our vendor, and they shipped us a blob of software back and a replacement card just to be clear, and it hasn't recurred. We struggled a little bit because we were our backdoor access to our network wasn't as good as we thought it was, and so there was a lot of waiting very painfully at very terminals taking a very long time to respond. On the other hand, the reboot switch was still working, so that was what we should have tried first. 2 weeks later, actually, we had a power cut again. This is a question of a supplier that we, as an ISP below a sort of medium size, we had to be renting space in a data center, and simply the power disappeared. And this was something that happened due to was a UPS failure, but because there was an electrical safety issue involved, suddenly our hands were tied as people that might want to. We might have wanted to investigate it, but as soon as electrical safety's suspected, there are electricians. They have to come on site. They have to come on site at 4 o'clock in the morning, and you're kind of helpless in that situation. You just have to. We were wondering. This was the point at which I think we started saving for our own data center, because we realised there are some sorts of hosting problems that were just all still outside of our control. Having said that, also when it comes to disaster planning, our bottom line was, we didn't really have a response to our customers, which is to say, we rely on this supplier, we still trust the supplier, it's not something that happens very often, and so we're doing nothing. There's quite often a sort of a pressure in the face of a disaster like that to say that you're doing something, even when there's nothing sensibly to be able to do. And at the size we were, we simply had to say, well, we might have a data center of our own in a couple of years, but it's not something you can sort of say with too much of a straight face to customers. Jumping back to another a software fault that we had in what started us off, which was the user mode Linux project a few years ago. This is sort of, we were selling Linux virtual machines, and I think this is quite a common pattern in virtualizers. This kind of software fault. I'm probably not going to leave it up long enough for anyone to spot the problem, but it's essentially time can go backwards. And so when you have an emulator like this that's kind of counting how much of the emulation to run since it last, sort of trying to count the number of ticks between runs, where the time goes backwards, you end up trying to run a very large number of loop cycles, which means suddenly all these virtual machines that were just bobbing along using a normal amount of CPU were thought they'd missed many years worth of execution and were trying to catch up. So this happened at midnight on I think 2006, first second of 2006, and it's happened again once with a completely different code base. I think this is something to do with emulating clocks and the fact that it's very hard and that very few people understand the issues. And in fact, there possibly isn't even a very good universal solution for doing this kind of thing. On the other hand, everyone who was using dedicated servers, nice simple hardware, was absolutely fine. So it was just a lesson to avoid virtualization where you can. And bugs that are going to happen less than once a year are also very likely to not be tested for. We then went and built our own virtualization, sort of cloud hosting platform, and decided that what it really needed was a new network storage layer. And for the first 12, 15 months of sort of production operation, it had a couple of very subtle data eating bugs, which I think was one of these lessons where people tell you not to write your own cryptography, not to write your own this, not to write your own that, blah blah blah. And network storage layers is one of those things that they look easier than they are, I would say. But I think unless you try, how do you learn? We had some very sympathetic users. Not many. It was subtle enough that it wasn't sort of that everyone's data got eaten at the same time, but it was every couple of weeks we had an odd event that we were investigating. Again, another reason not to rely on anything virtualized unless you absolutely have to. I think it was a lesson that actually in 2011 or 2012, but Amazon were learning a lesson about sort of doing storage at a distance. Yes, it was around the same sort of time. And another bug with our new virtualization platform was that we ended up, our cool feature was to be able to show the consoles of virtual machines so that you could break your networking and log back on and fix them without a network connection. And in common with a lot of companies doing this kind of thing, we were using VNC, which just gives you a nice view of your console over the network. And the plan was to put it behind a nice, safe, secure shell tunnel. And so we did that. We gave it a global IP address, and then two people thought it was the other's job to leave the firewall on. So after the first few hundred customers, we started noticing graffiti on consoles and strange reboots and this kind of thing. And this is when we noticed there that you shouldn't just test for things going down. You should test for things that should be down. And a little bit about how our growing team should be organised. Finally, we as we built our data center, which was largely done by a single large subcontractor with a lot of fussing around from us two co-founders, we managed to we had an electrician sort of take down a rack by drilling through a power cable. The electrician got very lucky and managed to earth their drill rather than any part of them, avoided the current flowing through them. But I think this was a case of possibly needing a little more supervision and paranoia around a new and unfamiliar business process. Having rented data centers for so long, it sort of brought home the sort of the reason why Telecity was so keen on us not bringing cardboard in and not bringing certain things in, and soft drinks, and the kind of health and safety angle that we'd had sort of been provided to us on a platter. But I was pleased with the report that happened, because this took down one rack, which was one. It did include one high-profile customer, but it was something that our staff reported within a few minutes before I knew about it. Before my partner, who put the data center together with Sudlow's, had sort of really investigated what had gone wrong. And I think that's kind of it. I had some sort of glib tips, but I think I will skip through those things to talking about how we admit our failures. We've never really had a situation where being very open about what we did has ever got us sued. Or at least the one time it nearly did, we felt like it was worth the 99 times that we've been quicker at responding to things has been worth the one time that somebody decided to use that information against us, or try to, or threaten to. And we just kind of continue on our sort of quest to remove third parties and give ourselves simply to give ourselves more options and more redundancy in our supply chain. And that's kind of it. I'd love to, if anyone else has any embarrassing failure stories they'd like to share with me anonymously, or now even, I'd be very pleased. But yes, thank you for listening.